Hi, good afternoon. Welcome to CITRIS Research Exchange. I am Ming Wu. I'm a chief scientist of CITRIS, as well as a professor in the electrical engineering and computer science. I also like to welcome our web viewers from other campuses, and also thank Infineon for supporting this research series. And also like to remind you there are 5 more days to go for your big ideas, if you have any. The 30,000 prize was due March 23rd. The flyer is in the back. So make sure if you want to participate, 5 more days. And next week is a spring break, so we don't have a research exchange next week. And it's a pleasure to introduce today's speaker. Professor Warren Sack. He is Associate Professor of Film and Digital Media at the University of California, Santa Cruz. He received his bachelor degree from Yale and master and Ph.D. From MIT Media Lab. And he has a very unusual combination of background in software design and media theory. So he's going to talk about Discourse Architecture. Let's welcome Professor Warren Sack.
Thank you. It's very nice. Project, specifically an MFA project, with 2 of my students, former students, Michael Dale and Aphid Stern. And we've been very nicely funded by the Sunlight Foundation, with support from other folks like NSF and CITRIS, to do an open archive of the U.S. House and Senate floor proceedings. So we've got all the video from the last few years up here, from January 2006 to date. And it's in a Web 2.0 environment. So what one can do is, let's say we're interested in Hillary Clinton. We can look at sort of what she said on the Senate floor. Each of these pieces of video has behind it the same architecture, the same mechanism as Wikipedia. So here's the video itself, and we can play that.
But America's best days
Do I have audio?
are still ahead of us. Mr. President, I ask consent to submit my entire statement for the record.
And it's more or less set up so that, let's say you are a filmmaker. You can download this in high definition. you're a TV producer, someone like that, you can download it in a high definition. If you are a blogger, what especially Michael's worked really hard on is being able to allow you to embed this. So this is just a little piece of JavaScript. If you cut and paste it into blogger.com or something like that, it'll let you run that piece of video in there. And that's just been difficult because web-based video is just kind of now at a point where it's portable and stuff like this. The whole project's been built from the bottom up in an open source manner, so that even the codec that's used, the Ogtheora codec, is open source. All the code is open source. Everything we've built is open source. And like I was saying, the back end here is the same. Every piece of video has a wiki page associated with it. If I don't like the way that this has been transcribed, I can actually edit it. I can have a whole discussion about it. We can have a dispute about what was said on the floor, and so forth, all within that. So Michael's now half-time at UCSC and half-time at the Wiki Foundation. So all of our code for handling video is actually going to go into the back ends of a bunch of Wiki Foundation projects like Wikipedia, so that you can have embedded video in there. So I'm going to come back to this because I think this opens up a set of possibilities, ways of talking about stuff. But I'm going to sort of anchor my discussion today on an old piece of work that I did. I guess I need another browser window here. An old piece of work that I did for my Ph.D. dissertation at the Media Lab is called the conversation map. Maybe I should just wait for that to load. It's like, yeah, there we go. Okay. But, wait. I'm going to give you some examples. I'm going to tell you what the problem is that I'm trying to address with all these examples. My approach is discourse architecture, that's the name. And I want to go give you some more examples. But the example right now is this conversation map. As I mentioned, I did this for my PhD at MIT. And then a couple of curators have asked to this just lately to have this resurrected and shown. So it was just in a show over at SF MoMA called The Art of Participation. And it was also, I just show you installations. That was The Art of Participation. And there's Mark Davis, for those of you who know Mark from his time at Berkeley. He's now at Yahoo. And it just closed. We had it down UC Darnet, UC Digital Arts Research Network, brings together a lot of the digital arts faculty across the UC system. We had a UC Darnet show down at Irvine in the Beale Center where it was set up there. What is this thing? It gives you, it takes a big bunch of email posted, let's say, to a news group or a listserv, and gives you 4 summaries. This is who's talking to whom. So it's just a production of a social network where the dots are people and the connections mean that those two people have exchanged messages. And if the connections are shorter, that means they've exchanged a lot more messages. Themes of discussion. This is in the background using an algorithm of, for those of you who are into that, lexical cohesion analysis, just to look at the flow of the threads and see, well, what words or phrases come up again and again. Or it actually uses a thesaurus in the background to keep track of near variants. So if we click on Israel, what we're looking at here is about 1,500 messages posted to Soch, Culture, Palestine about a month ago, which is a Usenet news group or a Google group. If I click on one of these themes, I can see who in the social networks involved with this theme of discussion. And then I can see down here the third summary, which are all the threads organized chronologically upper left to lower right. And if a thread just has a dot, like these things do, that just means one message. If it's got a dot, and then if it's just a line, that's a message and a response. And then these things are more complicated. These are more complicated threads plotted in a sort of radial diagram. So this is the first message, and this is a response to that message. This is a response to the response. I can double click on those and look, see what the message was. The fourth summary here is looking at emerging synonyms or themes of discussion. Could even think of them as metaphors. So it's just using an algorithm to automatically compute a rough draft thesaurus given all of the text of each of the messages. So for each noun, it keeps track of what are the other words that show up with that noun. So if I click on child, I can see these are actions done by child, actions done to child, that is to say, all the language in the messages is parsed, and we see where does child appear as an object of, let's say, kill, or a subject of execute. And it's just doing a more or less a vector-based comparison of two terms. If two terms have similar third terms that show up with them, then they're considered as possible synonyms or connections. So people and country here, something you might actually see in a thesaurus. In this group, that gets reproduced. This is a little bit less likely, something like child and soldier. Palestinians and Israelis end up being similar here because we're really summarizing across everybody's language. And so this is hard to read, and this is sort of a point I want to make when I show you my third example here. It's really hard to tell how contentious a discussion is here. You could probably guess this is incredibly contentious, right? But in this particular case, Palestinians and Israelis are considered synonyms because if we summarize across everybody's language, it ends up looking like similar terms are associated with them. That might simply mean that there's two sides to the dispute, and each side is using the same pejorative terms on the other side. All right? But that's hard to tell from here, because looking for consensus is one way to actually characterize what this is showing you, but also to characterize many of the algorithms that get used in computational linguistics in general. You take a big corpus, you're trying to say what are the regularities across the corpus regardless of who's saying what, right? Now, in comparison to that, so that's the installation at the Beale, is thinking about language not as coming together as a kind of production of a consensus, but actually as a game, as a language game in the terms of the philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein. The notion that we're trying to win in some kind of a contest. So if the kind of political ideals behind the conversation map are consensus and listening to the other side, the kind of ideals for this project are really about getting your message out regardless of what the other side is saying. So this was a part of this exhibition, Making Things Public. Nice big thick catalog from MIT about the show. Lots of other projects. This is sort of the installation of the project there. But the way this one works is that you have, I'll just use a little piece of video to do this maybe. You have a discussion, and I'm just going to show you actually an example of the same discussion that I showed you of a conversation map of. Maybe I shouldn't do that. That was Bruno Latour, the curator. Okay, why don't I just stop it here and I'll just point it out here. So you're in the discussion, you post a message to the news group, let's say. You're assigned arbitrarily a face. And your face is positioned on the edge of a circle. As you win points, you move to the middle of the circle. You win points in two ways. By engaging others in discussion. So you can't win just by spamming the group. The other more important thing that happens is you win by introducing words or phrases that are taken up by others in the discussion. You become an opinion leader. And this is very much akin to the way Democrats and Republicans play the game of getting their message out in this country. So Frank Lutz is the guy who does it for the Republicans. Until recently, it was George Lakoff who did it for the Democrats, right? The idea of crafting a message to saying, if you're going to talk about this issue, you should use this language. And so that's sort of the background political idea behind agonistics. And that comes out of a set of work done by these two political theorists, Chantal Mouffe and Ernesto Laclau, who have this notion of agonistic democracy. Agonistic democracy is a different model of democracy where we think of a kind of other sets of democracy, deliberative democracy, where you're trying to think, how would the experts understand this, or how does the other side think about this, and integrate that into a more rational decision production. Laclau and Mouffe aren't against that. They're just simply saying that's not really the way it works. The way it works is really the way things unravel now, which is much more like a game. So let me just, because I have one locally here. And I'll just show you, this is just going to show you what does this look like. Actually, I'll just start it right at the beginning here. What does the same discussion as I showed you a conversation map look like if we do it in terms of agonistic? So this could be ongoing, but this is sort of pre-recorded. Could be just the interface changes every time a new message comes in, but this is just sort of pre-recording it. So we have 3 messages insofar, 3 players. Each of them get positioned at Okay, someone finally got something. And you can tell this is a really crass discussion. Okay, and then I'm just going to mention one more piece of work. That's not actually a demo, but a book that just came out from MIT Press. Well, not just came out a year ago now. Software Studies. A group of us, led by Matthew Fuller, Matt's at Goldsmith College, wrote more or less a set of entries on software where we sort of explain what's the cultural implications of software. Like, given something like, my entry was on memory. What's the difference between artificial memory as it was thought about 2,000 years ago and the way we think about memory today, where you can go to tiger.com and get an extra gig to put in your laptop or something like that. So I think the way all these things go together is first is an insight that's useful for the design of both virtual and physical spaces and institutions. Corporations, communities, collaborations, and disputes can be conceptualized of networks of recurrent conversations and exchanges. And the second is the point, actually, that Bruno Latour makes in titling of the show, Making Things Public. Publics, more generally people, are organized around things. And this is an ancient insight, etymologically etched into the Latin roots of the word republic. Res is the Latin for thing. And so republic means the thing of the public, right? But it's also a new insight, at least for social science, that, to paraphrase Langdon Winner's well-known essay, is this: artifacts do have politics. So consequently, there's no adequate understanding of politics, social or cultural systems, without an imbricated analysis of a system's embedding in a set of material and technical conditions. Succinctly, this might be rendered as a slogan: no representation without fabrication. Or in other words, to know something, you've got to make and unmake things. So this also underlies the insight of the software studies work, the written work. The premise of that book is akin to Marshall McLuhan's media studies maxim that we make our media and then they make us. In his book, A Preface to Plato, Eric Havelock makes the point that ancient Greece underwent a transformation when it went from being an oral-based, poetry-based community to becoming a written, prose-based community. In ancient Greece, they went from poetry to prose at about the time of Plato, and that's what Eric Havelock's point is in that book. We're undergoing another transformation here, culturally, societally, and so forth, where we're investing many of our rules, regulations, things that constitute our society. We're moving from things that are prose-based to program-based. And so the question of exactly how that code works and what those things are, those computational things are, takes on this huge it is one of the big questions, I think, of today. So the thesis of software studies is that the current transformation from prose to programs, a new dependence of everyday life and scientific modeling onto computers and networks and away from the written page is as radical a transformation as the shift from poetry to prose in Plato's times. So when dialectics, which originally meant the art of conversation, was invented to break the flow of poetic recitation and force the performer out of a poetic state of mind to answer a question, the social order was challenged because the ongoing networks of conversation or poetic interaction were changed. Analogously, the contemporary introduction of code into culture introduces a foreign object, a new thing, into our networks of conversation and communication, and consequently creates new material conditions for everyday life. conditions that the legal scholar Larry Lessig refers metonymically to when he speaks of code as law, or more apropos of today, code as architecture. So these four projects, if I include Metavid, all touch on these two issues. The order of things and the discourse of order are two essential elements of institutional and improvisational organization. Both issues, both insights are well known and well represented in art and design. And so for those of you who are in that area, I'm referring specifically, especially to things like Nicolas Bourriaud's book Relational Aesthetics, or Grant Kester down at UCSD's notion of dialogical aesthetics. But this aesthetic, if we think about it, an aesthetic is also just kind of common sense for most designers. For example, one would be hard-pressed to find a designer who designs a square or a rectangular table while nevertheless intending to facilitate a round table discussion. Yet this common sense about the order of things and the discourse of order seems to be less common than one might imagine. And here's the problem. In the United States, public space is splintering into shards. So this is, I think, so this is the crux of what I'm trying to say here. What the kind of software that I'm trying to build, the kind of work that I'm trying to engender in student projects, has really been thinking about our society, our culture, as these ongoing sets of conversations. And that when we build new technologies, we're more or less building platforms to have those ongoing conversations happen, or we actually insert things which become agents, which become interlocutors, which become speakers in those conversations. And we sort of have to think about everything that we're intervening in with these new technologies in this manner. And so the manner that I'm talking about is, I'm just terming discourse architecture. We think about building systems in order to facilitate discussions. And this is an incredibly dire problem right now. Our public space has been messed up by all kinds of things. Ray Oldenburg, the sociologist, says really we have lost a lot of community because we've lost things like pubs, bars, cafes, and other neighborhood institutions where conversation between friends and strangers is facilitated. These are the places where outsiders can come in and talk, as well as neighbors can talk to one another. So that's kind of, he says that it's a loss of the great good place, or what he calls third places. Another way to think about this is as the political scientist Robert Putnam does, is what we're losing, what we have lost, he graphically shows this quantitatively, we've lost our social capital. We don't know our neighbors. We don't know one another. We don't, in a very specific manner, we don't talk to people anymore. People don't know who lives next door to them. And simply without that kind of capital, the social capital, we can't organize, we can't do stuff together. This is not just a problem of neighborhoods, though. It's also a media problem. So Ben Bagdikian, who was dean of the journalism school here for a long time, makes this point about newspapers and so forth. We're losing these spaces where outsiders and insiders can talk to one another. The editorial pages of newspapers were one of those really important spots. We're losing the newspapers. And there's sort of various ways of diagnosing this. From an art perspective, we could say we're moving towards a society of the spectacle. Other people, Benedict Anderson, he points out that this kind of stuff happens in these huge transformations, social transformations. Benedict Anderson sort of points out that new media technologies, now I'm not just talking about computers, I'm talking about what was new at a given point in time. new media technologies can be both a plus and a minus to this kind of loss of community, loss of connection, loss of social capital of third places. They can be a plus insofar as they can gather, new technologies can gather new sets of people together. So Benedict Anderson's example is what we know of as the nation state today. Many of these things that we call countries today were more or less constituted in the 19th century. And Benedict Anderson's point is that these could not even have happened if we wouldn't have had a high-speed printing press. If you don't have a means of reproducing sort of reading material and then distributing it rapidly across a wide area, you have no way to keep people metaphorically or physically on the same page, right? So that's a plus. That's a plus. But there's also a minus of all this, and this is a variety of philosophers have pointed out that we had this new public space. It collapsed. I think we need to think about it more the way Marshall McLuhan did, as I mentioned before. We make our media, and then they make us. You know, we produce a high-speed printing press that stitches us together into a much larger community we can talk about as a country. But then, once we think that way, what kind of media do we make in order to either continue that or to change the social formation? I'm not going to go into a lot of this. I think what I want to point out is that what I'm advocating here, discourse architecture, has been coming up in especially the area of computer-supported cooperative work for at least 20 years or so. And that I know this is a fraught thing to introduce here. This is Winograd and Flores's book, Understanding Computers and Cognition, A New Paradigm for Design, which in many ways came up in the computer-supported cooperative work environment and was disputed and in many ways left to the side. There still is a conference, yearly conference around this stuff, but it's really not given the same importance. In some ways, I'm trying to resurrect this, but maybe with some additions. So they make these four different points in the book. Any organization is constituted as a network of recurrent conversations. Conversations are linked in regular patterns of triggering and breakdown. In creating tools, we're designing new conversations and connections. And computers are a tool for conducting the network of conversations. So this notion of discourse architecture, which actually there was the etymology of that term is that there was a research group at Apple for a bunch of years called Discourse Architecture. Some of those folks subsequently became my colleagues. Tom Erickson, who was one of them, he's now at IBM, and Susan Herring and I wrote we put together a little workshop for Kai. This is about 5 years ago now, on discourse architecture, trying to see what the interest of this is, and it's continued, but we've got to modify Winograd and Flores's model a couple different ways in order to actually deal with a much larger set of issues than they were dealing with. They were specifically talking about businesses, really, as conversations for action, where you get stuff done. The kinds of conversational breakdown that we're seeing in a public space area are not just conversations for action. They're just some of them are just about coming out of your front door and saying hi to your neighbor. That is an affective conversation, right? You're acknowledging the existence of the other person. You're introducing yourself. You're not trying to get something done when you come outside your front door and say hi. So how do we extend it so that we can cover that kind of stuff as well? Well, I think this is the stuff that I won't necessarily go into, but there's been a bunch of work that's been done in other areas. Like politics, I explained that Leclau and Mouffe have been thinking about politics as a language game. They deal with some of this stuff. Another set of theorists, the Italian autonomists, people like Paolo Verno, Maurizio Lazzarato, and others have been saying, you know, a lot of work is about conversation too. It's about affective conversation, the kind of conversation where you stand in front and you say hello. So that's what most service jobs are, right? I mean, you go to Burger King, that person behind the counter is getting paid to step up and say hello and smile at you. That's a really important part of understanding what work is today. And so they say, you know, cool, we could think about work as it has been later, but let's turn more towards these linguists and philosophers who talk about language games to understand what work and society is today. And that's extensions of this to the web and so forth are pretty straightforward, but people like Tiziana Terranova did a nice job of extending it. She's more or less pointing out, you know, a lot of the stuff that we thought about as play before is now the business model. So you think it's fun to upload photos of your friends and family to Flickr, but that, like, without you doing that, and you doing that as play, Flickr goes under, right? It's that is this weird articulation in today's economy, service economy, between play and work, one of them. So there's kind of two pieces of work you're going to do if you approach things this way. One is look at the patterns of conversation, see them, analyze them, kind of try to describe them, and then design a technology to facilitate those ones. Or maybe to break them up. Maybe the patterns of conversation are bad rather than good. And so I'm just going to give you a couple examples of this. And just for reasons of expediency, for graphical reasons, I'm going to limit this discussion to threads of discussion where, you know, you can specifically see if someone posts what the reply is. But this doesn't necessarily need to be just a virtual analysis. This can be an analysis of face-to-face conversations and things like that. And some of the really important stuff, John Gumfertz and other folks around Berkeley have done analyses of conversation over the last few decades. And I think a lot of those kinds of insights can be applied to this sort of analysis. What are the patterns of conversation going on? We usually, in our inbox, it looks like this, right? An indented list. We could also do it like this. This is the conversation map. Here's the first post, and these are responses to the first post. This is called a radial plot, right? So it could be an indented list, could be a radial plot. Doesn't really matter. But if I take something like this and say, okay, here are, you know, 400 threads from a particular news group, is there a pattern that's going on here that characterizes what the discussion is versus this one? And all I'm trying to point out in this particular comparison here is look how much more elaborated these things are versus this one. Right? There's a lot of lines here. And here we have got much more complicated patterns. So I first did this in 2002 with some of my students when I was here at Berkeley. We just looked at the Java Sun developers forums. And they said, look, we've got these huge forums running. We want to know who's answering questions, because that's important to our business. Who's answering questions for free? And we couldn't go through all the posts because that was hundreds of thousands of posts. So we said, well, can we write a method that finds those patterns of conversation where it can see where somebody poses a question and someone else answers it? And it turned out to be relatively straightforward. Step one, find the short threads. The long threads aren't where somebody gets a quick answer to a technical question. Two, find the participants who frequently end the threads. They answer the question. So the people who ask the questions are at the beginning of a short thread. The people who answer them are at the end of a short thread. And we did some analyses of this kind of thing. And that turned out to correlate quite well with like the population who was actually doing good for Sun's business, answering their questions. So here's what that looks like. You got a lot of these things. That's probably a lot of question-answer pairs. So a thing that I've done with a group, both former students from here, but also a group in France, we've been looking at open source software design and tried to characterize what are those patterns of discussion. That's not a question-answer kind of thing. That's like proposing possibilities and then elaborating those possibilities, ultimately going off and implementing and things like that. So those look different. And what we were looking at was, this was specifically for the Python project. Is there some correlation between someone's assigned role? So if you're on one of these software projects, you're assigned a role. Let's say you're really interested in a particular package. You want to integrate that into the language. You become the leader, a champion for that particular idea. Versus, let's say you're just developing that. Versus their performed roles. You know, did you start a new branch of the discussion? Did you end the discussion? Are you quoting from others or not quoting from others? And I won't go into this completely, but we did find a lot of correlations between the two. You perform very differently in the conversation if you're a project leader versus if you are a developer. You perform very differently as an administrator versus a developer, and you can see this in these threads of discussion. What's political debate look like? We were looking for places in news groups where people across ideological divides were having a substantive exchange. Right? It wasn't just a, yeah, I agree with that. It was like, no, you're totally wrong. So we built on an empirical analysis that my colleague John Kelly at Harvard and Columbia did, where he looked at a whole bunch of posters in these really turbulent political discussions. So we knew, just from hand analysis, who was there frequently and what their political position was. And what we were trying to do is find threads with one or more frequent posters, find threads where no one person dominates, right? If you have a thread where everybody's there, you're not going to, where only one person is dominating, you're not going to find this back and forth. Find threads that have at least one message with multiple replies. So you want at least one message in the thread where lots of people respond. That's sparking discussion. And then find the threads where everyone's posted a few messages. You have this nice thing. This was a kind of, I'm giving you the output of this, not what we went into thinking how we would find these things. This turned out to be the pattern that you could use if you were just looking at the structure of the threads to find where substantive deliberative debates were occurring. And this is where I want to get back to MetaVid. We don't live in a world where there substantive political debates happen very often. We live in a world of polemics, right? This is Adamic and Glatz, who did this a couple years ago at HP Labs, just showing you which blogs link to which other blogs. And in a world in which we had lots and lots of substantive exchanges across the ideological divide, this would mostly be purple, but it's not. Another way to look at this is a plot of Amazon, all red over here, all blue over here, very little purple. People who buy this book also buy this book. What this more or less shows, and this is Valdis Krebs who did this, what this shows is that people on the right read a certain set of books that other people on the right do. People on the left read a lot of books that other people on the left do. But people don't read the same books. If you're on the right, you don't read those books, and vice versa. So what is polemics? What's it look like? This is Martin Wattenberg and Fernanda Villegas' plot of 2 years of interactions around the Wikipedia entry for abortion. Suffice it to say, without decrypting the semiotics of this graphical language, what you're seeing here is that people come in, they add a bunch of stuff, and then they delete the other side's part of it over and over and over again. And so you can see that this sort of kind of wiggly line like this is showing you this is incredibly contentious because people aren't even listening to the other side. They're not only just not listening, they're effacing the other side's contributions. So you could read this and say, oh my God, so what's the tool for a world in which dialectics doesn't happen anymore? What's the tool to facilitate discussions where everything's a polemic? And you could look at this and say, well, can't be Wikipedia because it's so, everything's getting deleted from the other side. But I'm going to read this sort of more optimistically. I'm going to say maybe it is Wikipedia because there is an entry for abortion in Wikipedia. It might change radically all the time, but there is one. So I think that's one of the investments we've made in this MetaVid project, has been to make the back end Wikipedia a place where people can collaboratively write together. They can delete other people's contributions, true, but that gets recorded. You can roll things back. So the back end of all of this video archive is the same thing, same tools as Wikipedia. And yes, I think the reality is that it's going to be really polemical. We just live in a world today where it is polemical, but that doesn't mean we can't try to put something together. We can't try to build a platform where people can contribute from really different, not just sides of the aisle, but different parts of the world. And so, I mean, that's kind of where we've ended up with this particular project. I'd like to just sort of finish by having you think about and discuss maybe a little bit what MetaVid is and how it works. But I also want to just mention that I run a group at Santa Cruz called Public Media. Many of these projects, so as I mentioned, MetaVid was one of the projects that grew out of that, but many of these projects are much more art projects than technology projects. Troy Allman is doing something where a really community-based thing. He, through a very ingenious means, saved $17,000 by just getting a TA ship and living in a way, well, let's just call it dumpster diving, living in a way of extreme thrift. And then he went to Toledo, Ohio, where he's previously from, and he bought a 7,000 square foot Victorian mansion. And he's doing it, he's producing this work as a sort of social sculpture, putting in a bicycle repair shop, a grocery cooperative, a Food Not Bombs nonprofit, all these other things in this place in Toledo. It's a very ambitious project. Nada Ilokovi is thinking about, she's originally, her family's from Serbia. She's thinking about really this performance notion of sevda, a musical tradition about the separation of love. And it has a lot also to do with this institution of forced or arranged marriage. Mickey Foster is doing DIY experiments in crafting and technology from a queer perspective, queer and feminist frameworks. She does a public access television show where she teaches people how to make a bunch of stuff. She knows a lot about electronics and other kinds of technology production. And she's trying to think about the history of crafting and what's it mean to do crafting. What are the politics of that? Who was involved? Who's involved today? And what's that have to do with the queer and feminist perspective today? Rupesh Sitharan is an artist curator from Malaysia. He's doing an installation that thinks about that. Lola Elfman has done a lot of the technology side for a variety of political campaigns. She's a student in the social documentation program at UCSC, and she did a nice documentary about sort of the 3 days before the general election in Chicago. Her project being called Between Kansas and Kenya, which focuses on Barack Obama. And then Josh McVeigh Schultz, who might come to Berkeley soon. He was at Berkeley before. He's just done his MFA, and he's doing the synaptic crowd. Vox pop experiments. Can you build a technology so that a group of people can interview someone else? So it's kind of a voting technology where everybody can participate on what question are we going to ask next. And then he'd like to build from that, can we build a technology where a group of people can interview another group of people? Sort of performance and technology together. That's what the group's up to, the public media, if you're interested, publicmedia.ucsc.edu. I think I'm going to leave it there. Thanks for coming.
Questions?
Well, let's see. You're not really answering how we should design spaces. You seem to be surrendering toward a trend. Now, before the internet, there was also polemics. There's ways of insulting people, intimidating them to silence, up to violence. And so this is a long-going thing. And that was considered bad. And essentially, deleting other people's comments and cutting off conversation would be considered bad. And it is in non-electronic dialogue. So what we really should be looking at is how to limit people's interactions so they can't dominate, but are essentially coerced to listen by the social rules of the game and become empathetic. And so things like deep listening to the other side needs to be enforced. And then some type of mind mapping gets around the deleting, where is indeed a record of everything that was said and how it links together that's immediately available to everyone doing the discourse. So if they just back up, they can look at the map and then are forced to see how things are going.
I think point well taken. I don't have a recipe for this. What I am trying to call attention to are little tiny details. Sometimes we think of them as little tiny technical details for online forums that, if you adjust them a little bit, actually change the dynamic of conversation a lot, and that we should be paying attention to those little tiny technical details and think about their bigger implications. So Martin Wattenberg and Fernanda Villegas went back and tried to do their analysis of Wikipedia a few years later. I gave them a talk last fall, and I said, so how is that project going? Like, where are those edit wars in Wikipedia? They said, oh, those are gone. And the reason why they're gone is because Wikipedia changed things so that if you delete someone else's comments, I think it's 3 times, you're cut out. You can never do it again. So there are no edit wars on Wikipedia. A little tiny, like, this is probably 1 line of code, right? If intervention greater than 3, goodbye. But that's kind of, I think that's Larry Lessig's point in his book Code. I'm on the bandwagon of a variety of other people, just trying to say, let's pay attention to these architectural details which change the discussion a lot. And yeah, we should be arguing for how we want the discussion to go. So Professor Fishkin, who's now at Stanford, does all these workshops and deliberative discussion, goes into a neighborhood, says, oh, you're going to build a new desalinization plant. Let's bring in like a random selection of your neighbors and then a whole bunch of experts around environmental design and things like that, and have you think about whether or not you really want that or not. I think this goes hands in hand, because you still end up with a set of questions which are design questions that if you're going to do it face-to-face, they're simple things. Like you can have people sit around in a circle, or you can have them sit like this. What's better? Well, if we actually want to have a discussion where everybody's equal, the chairs should not be arranged like this. Right? So it seems like, oh, that's totally trivial. But it's not totally trivial. That's kind of that's the point, I think. I don't have a recipe, but I think the spices or the little touches are actually much more influential than we might think.
Is that a question? Yeah, I appreciate your answer. I'm interested in network publics too, and I've been using social science research methods where interviews and surveys and things like that. So I was wondering, have you done any of that as well? It's more of a methodological question then.
I think this stuff works best when I work with students or colleagues who are coming with other methodologies. So I've worked a variety with anthropologists who do sort of ethnographies. I've worked with sociologists and other people who are really thinking about this from very different theoretical frameworks and looking at some of the same data. The kind of issue that I find working with a lot of the social scientists is that a lot of them want to say, well, we'll examine it descriptively, but we're not going to say what should happen next. Then that's a kind of disciplinary boundary that's really hard to get over. So there's got to be somebody with, an engineering background or an architecture background that says, well, let's try this. Let's rearrange the chairs so we're all in a circle. It's not, the social scientists are not apt to do that unless you really push them. So I would say when this work is best, I present myself as someone who's training. I got my degree from MIT Media Lab. That's in the School of Architecture at MIT. I say, I know something about designing these things. Let's talk about how they should be redesigned. But let's start by looking at the patterns and then see what the next step is. And, you do that work. Of course, it never ends up being that easy of a division. But that's a good way to start the collaborations. You do that work, I'll do this work. And it always ends up being mixed. Yeah.
Okay, let's thank Professor Warren Sack again for his wonderful talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you.